Howdy, folks. In today's episode, we'll talk about how to photograph some of the biggest celebrities in the world with one of the best, right after this. Welcome to Camera Take, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, come on, people. You can really help me out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help me get even more amazing guests on the show, although I don't think that's even possible. It's just one click. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the celebrity fashion and beauty photographer, educator, and maker of truly iconic images. The man who shot everyone from Samuel L. Jackson, Oprah and Jamie Foxx, to Queen Latifah, Zendaya, and none other than the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin. Please welcome the one and only Matthew Jordan Smith. Matthew, how's it going, man?
It's going very good. I like that intro, man. I gotta say, wow, that's me. Wow. How you doing? How's it going? You make it sound like it's like a wonderful, life and career. When I think back about all those people I've worked with, but for me, it's just like living my dream. That's it. And you do it day by day, and sometimes you get lucky.
You've gotten lucky a lot of times because when I look at your portfolio, it is incredible. It never stops. That's the thing. The amount of celebrities that you've had the opportunity to photograph is just unbelievable.
I've been very, very fortunate for sure. I've been blessed, and I've been doing it for a long time also. But everybody thinks that I only shoot celebrities, but I didn't start my career that way at all. I started off doing fashion and beauty. And I was around at the time when it changed from being models on covers of magazines to being celebrities on covers of magazines. And that's kind of how it all started with that celebrity part. But I do a little bit of everything.
Was that like a noticeable trend? You mentioned you noticed when it changed. When did that happen?
Probably actually like the mid-90s, early 90s, because I went from being a photo assistant. And back then it was just like all models on the covers. It was the day of the supermodels. And then there was a transition where it went from being models on covers of magazines to being all celebrities. And now it's been that way ever since. Celebrities are on covers of everything or involved in everything. Magazine world is not so big as it used to be, unless you're in Japan. Japan is still a very tactile, very, tangible world. So people still like that tangible magazine here. But that's how it all began for me, just doing a lot of magazine work. And then that turned into advertising work. And now it goes into all kinds of realms.
It's interesting you mentioned the difference between North America and Europe and Japan, because Tokyo is where you currently live, right?
That's correct. Started my career in New York City, but the last 8 years I've been based in Tokyo.
And is that for a particular reason? Is that because of anything to do with photography, or is it sort of a personal preference?
A little bit of both. So I came to visit Japan the first time in 1999. And at the time I was going to visit a different place like every year, just like experience what it was like. And when I came here that very first time, I was like, wow, this place is different and special. And I kind of fell in love with it, like a lot of people do when they first come here. And then I had to come back over and over again. I came back maybe 8 times, 10 times over the years. And then 8 years ago, I made the move and decided to make the place that I love going the most my home.
How easy or difficult was that to just up sticks and move to Japan? I mean, given that you've had such a phenomenal career in the States, how easy was that to uproot and then just move halfway across the globe?
It was not easy at all. It was hard mentally deciding to make the move. I'd wanted to move for a long time, but to actually make the move happen, that took a bit. because you had this fear of like, oh, I've got this whole career. Will I lose all my clients? Will it be like starting all over again? And a lot of that fear is really just in your mind. When I moved here, it wasn't that different. And I've always traveled a lot for my career. Before, it's going back and forth between New York and LA a lot, and every other place as well, Europe. And now it's kind of the same thing still. It's just going from Tokyo to New York, or Tokyo to LA, or wherever.
So does that mean you're still traveling back to the United States quite frequently?
I was before COVID. Before COVID, I was flying back to the States about 10 times a year on average. Then, of course, the pandemic brought all that to a halt. And for the first time, actually, I was home for a long time. Like, wow, I kind of like being home and having like a normal schedule. So now I'm trying to limit that and stay here more than travel. So now I've cut it down to like maybe 4 times a year, sometimes 5. This year will be like 5 times this year, unless another trip gets added on. But I like staying home. I like having clients here and working with clients here and just enjoying my lifestyle here.
So, because I was going to ask you, like, what sort of effect has that had on the kind of clients that you shoot? Did you manage to, keep some of your original clients, or has it changed completely, or what effect has it had?
It hasn't changed completely. I still shoot a lot of celebrities back in the States when I go back, because a lot of them are friends from over the years of shooting. But my work here is Japanese personalities. Of course, celebrity here is very different than it is in the States. A lot of beauty work, still a lot of portrait work. So my whole career has always been like right here, the face, and it still is. Different types of clients, but it's still the same type of work, same type of beauty. Sometimes, execs or whatever. It's just still like face-based beauty work, portrait work.
And I mean, the industry, like you described earlier, has changed dramatically since, the 80s or the 90s, to now in 2024. What do you think have been the biggest changes, in particular in portrait work?
Oh, there's been so many. I think one of the biggest changes, well, there's been a lot of big changes. Number one, I was around to watch it go from, film to digital. That was the beginning of one change. Then, of course, the invention of, smartphones changed it and made photography kind of like ubiquitous, where everybody has a camera. So that changed our industry a lot. I think it went from being a specialty item or industry where people had to, learn the craft, to being almost like a commodity where people can just jump in and start and learn as they go. And that's definitely changed the industry a lot, to the point where when I introduce myself now, I usually don't say photographer, because that word means something different to everybody. Maybe, somebody's little brother or cousin might be a photographer and they just bought a camera 6 months ago. So what's that difference between that person and the person who has years of experience and is proficient at their craft? So I usually will say something like, oh, I'm a lens-based artist, or something else different to make people ask a question. Oh, what is that? And then I'll go into, the work I've done or what I shoot, who I shoot for. And then I'll say photographer. But I give them a visual first, so they don't say, oh, yeah, what else do you do?
Yes, actually, you're right. It's become more and more difficult to sort of define, what we do. I'm sort of, I'm at the moment, I'm tending to call myself a commercial photographer, just because, well, ultimately I get paid to shoot. That is a commercial transaction. It's basically as simple, as, do you know what I mean? Because it's become, as you say, it's become so ubiquitous. Everybody's got a smartphone, and everybody is all of a sudden a photographer. And it's become more difficult in that way.
True. You have to make yourself stand out in any way you can. Before it was a big deal to only say, oh yeah, I only shoot, with natural light. But today, anybody can do that. So you really have to be up on your game. You've got to be a master of something, whatever it is. You've got to have your own identity, so you don't become a commodity type photographer, just doing anything and everything and not standing out. Because if you do that, you can't charge a lot for sure. They'll just go to the next person who's the cheapest person around, and that happens a lot. So you really got to make yourself a specialty item, so people see your work and they really want that work, that look. Then you can get work and charge what you want to charge. It's not easy as it was in the 90s for sure, in the early 2000s, but you still have to do the work, do the marketing and all those things. And probably the biggest thing I think that you have to do today is what I had to do at the start of my career: work on relationships. It's the end all be all. I have so many interns and, new photographers, and they're asking about, do I need to be an influencer or post all the time and all these different things online? And while all that's great, nothing beats relationships, building real relationships.
You're absolutely right. People tend to forget that even when, although in the world today, we're very often, we're sort of communicating via screens, for example, via email or text messaging or like whatever message, like whatever it's called nowadays, whatever the latest
That's true.
thing
All right,
is.
exactly.
And it's so, or what is it, WhatsApp or whatever it is, right? But people, and of course, we don't necessarily communicate in real time either. You leave a message and then 6 hours later, somebody gets back to you, well, maybe 2 days later or whatever. And it's like these conversations are sort of spread out over like a week, when in real life, you could have the same conversation in like 30 seconds, but it's just,
Exactly.
it just takes so much longer. But people tend to forget that behind the screen on either end, they're still humans, and the same rules of relationship building are still true today as they were back then. And maybe mastering that skill can give you that competitive edge.
I look around and I see people just like looking down at their devices all the time. And because of that, a lot of people have lost the art of communication. And it is so important, I think, more now than ever before, because we are all, divided by our devices, or looking at a device to communicate, or email, or social media, all that stuff. So seeing somebody in person and having that connection, nothing trumps that.
I see this actually with my own children. So I have 3 kids. The oldest ones are 22 and 20, and the youngest one is 13. Wow. And the thing is, with the 2 older ones, they have a real problem. They're both at university now, right? And they have a real problem speaking to people without a screen. Like, for instance, when it's, simple, I mean, you can start with like simple things like, okay, well, I'm not feeling well. Have you called the doctor? Oh no, I tried to send him a message. And I'm like, well, you're gonna have to pick up the phone and call them. Oh, that wasn't a thing. I couldn't book an appointment online. Well, did you call the phone number? Oh no. Why not? It's just this thing. It's crazy, isn't it?
But it's true. It is crazy when you think about it. It's super, super crazy. And I'm not sure when we'll turn past this page, because, every page turns for sure. It's just a very different time. And we've got to just keep in mind that nothing will ever beat that communication person to person.
And it's, of course, it's something that I assume that's helped you build your career, basically, being able to shoot, celebrities and I suppose, creating great relationships, not only with clients, but also with agents and so on and so forth.
It is. I tell you what, like, I've been through so many ups and downs in the industry, like, going through things like the pandemic, or going back to even like 9/11, when there are these dips in the industry. What keeps you going is having real relationships with clients who become your friends, and everybody comes together and you like say, oh, what are you doing? Oh, let's have lunch. And then that lunch turns into talking about an idea, and that turns into, an assignment or a project or whatever. Because we're all whatever, position they have, creative director, art director, client, whatever, they're a person first and foremost, and we all have that same thing. We've all been through the same ups and downs, and talking about that, they see not just you as a photographer, but they see you as a person first who is a photographer. And then that leads to you building that relationship, that friendship, and lifelong clients.
And, it's exactly the same actually in the music industry. So, as everybody listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube will know by now, I used to have a career as a session musician before I went into photography. And, one of the things I used to be, people used to ask me all the time was like, what does it take to be a session musician? Do you have to know how to do this? And I used to say like, well, first of all, you got to be a nice guy because you're stuck in a studio, with a producer, with an engineer, with whatever other musicians. And if you're not somebody who can work in a team, then nobody is, or if you're an idiot or whatever, people will not want to work with you again. And it's just really that simple because you're stuck in this small room for sometimes weeks, And if you're not the kind of person that's easy to get on with, like if you don't know, my friend David Berkman tends to say, if you don't know how to hang, then you're just not going to get booked again. It's really that simple.
That is just that simple. I love that. You got to learn how to hang, be the person people want to hang with. That's so true. And it's always been true. Like people who can be, great at their craft, but be a jerk. And sooner or later, everybody finds out about it and they don't want to be around that person. It's always been that way. And that's for a lot of careers, period. Not just photography, but for, musicians, celebrities. I mean, because people talk and you hear how everybody is very often before you meet them.
When you shot your first sort of huge, A-list Hollywood celebrity, like how did you feel? Were you nervous, or how did you deal with that?
I was super nervous. That first celebrity shoot happened, and it was a woman who was extremely gorgeous. So I was nervous, number one, for that, and then also it's Halle Berry. So she was my first celebrities in the '90s, and she's like, at that time, probably the most beautiful woman on the planet, so I'm shooting her for a cover shoot. It's my first celebrity job that I got because this big photographer got a big advertising job before the editorial job and took the money. And then the client called me and said, oh, we have this opening for this job and we love the way you shoot women. Can you shoot her? I'm like, absolutely. But was I nervous? Definitely. But I just brought my A game and did what I do with all the models, and client loved the client. They loved the images, loved the cover. They gave me 2 more study covers that same year, and it kind of snowballed after that.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. That's a really important thing, to bear in mind, is that, when you get on with people, when people like what you do and you're an easy person to get on with, then people tend to bear you in mind when it comes to, finding somebody for the next job. I know this in my line of work, in commercial photography. I work a lot with video teams or AV teams, when it comes to like different conferences and different types of jobs. And more often than not, I'll get a call. It's like, oh, we're doing this job. We'd really like you to be on this job. Do you want to do it? And that is really just because I've built up a really positive working relationship with those individuals. Because to be honest with you, there's 1,000 other photographers in London that could do the same job. I mean, it's not, there's no magic there.
It's always that way. It's always that way. I mean, I get clients I had a client, I had a meeting yesterday, and the client wants to take me overseas to 2 different places. And could they find somebody there? Absolutely. But people want to work with people that they like. It will always be that way. Hopefully, it will always be that way. And, my entire career is based on that. Yes, I've shown a lot of great people, but just getting to the point where you are let in the room to do those kind of assignments takes you building that reputation of being dependable and being somebody who can not only just get the job done, but have a great time doing it. People, at the end of the day, they want to have a great time, feel comfortable, and once you can get past all those hurdles, you'll have work.
What's your process when it comes to approaching a shoot like that? Let's say when you have somebody like Halle Berry or like I said, Jamie Foxx or whoever, A-list celebrity, when you get booked for a job like that, what is your process? Do you do a lot of research? How do you approach that?
My first thing, whether I know them or not, is to dive into research, find out something that's part of their life beyond just what movie they've been in and all the typical stuff. I want to find out about their life as much as I can about them. Even if I've known them for 10, 15 years, I'll still dive into research to find out something else that I don't know. Maybe they've gone through, something recently in their life. I want to find that out so I can use that to talk to them about before we start shooting, because it's super important to build up a rapport before I throw a camera in front of their face. I want to make them feel comfortable by talking about usually their life, what they're going through. Do they have a new kid, or were they just sick, whatever. Like Jamie Foxx went through something recently. Find out about their life, talk about those things that every human connects with, and then start shooting. So the research is a big part of my process before the shoot. Then I get down to the tech part, how I get my story together. And today it's much easier than it was, back in the day, because we have, all these tools to create storyboards. I'll create a storyboard so I can show them my idea, tell them my idea, and then sometimes even let them hold either an iPad and go through themselves and see the story, talk about it together. And then it's not just me directing them on the shoot, but it's us together working to make an image come to life or a story come to life.
What sort of tools do you use to create storyboards like that?
Today I use a lot of AI. I use AI now to help create the storyboard, where before I was looking for a reference, like out of an old magazine and scanning those and put them together. Now it's super easy to make references or pull references, put together in no time flat, and show that as a presentation.
How do you approach the actual shoot itself? Do you use constant lighting or strobes, or how do you put that whole thing together?
I am a lighting maven. For me, it's all about the light. Always has been from me being a young photo assistant. Lighting was the thing that made the difference for me. It's actually how I got hired, I think, to first start shooting celebrities. My clients came to me because of my lighting. And I use a little bit of everything. I use constant lights. I use a strobe light. I don't use softboxes. Probably the only thing I don't like are softboxes. I know it's probably the most common light modifier in the world of photography, but I don't use them. And it's probably, I think, one thing that helps me stand out visually, because I like harder types of light. And I've learned kind of to master it and tweak it and make it feel different. So I'll first decide how I want to make the client look. If I want that old Hollywood look, if I want to like freeze the image, if I want motion, if I want this feeling that looks, beautiful and silky, smooth, but with a kick to it. I'll think about all those things and show them those references and then go from there. But the lighting just depends on who I'm shooting, their skin type, do they have great skin? Do they have bad skin? Whatever. I'll change my light based on those things.
Do you have a go-to modifier? Like, I don't know, you're saying you don't like soft boxes. What's your sort of preferred light modifier? I'm thinking like, for instance, a beauty dish or something like that. Do you have anything like very specific that you like above anything else?
It's evolved. At one point, it was HMIs. I used to love HMI lights. Then it went to being like the big Mola dishes. Then it went to being like the Profoto beauty dish. For a long time, I loved the beauty dish and still do. But now I'd say today, 2024, I love my constant lights. And I use a lot of different types. I'll use a Stellar CLX10 a lot because it's light and super powerful. I use big lights like RE Sky panels a lot. It just depends on the job. So it's hard to say I have like one favorite modifier anymore. I love light and I like having this feeling of making people feel comfortable. If I have a person who blinks a lot, I won't use strobe because they're trying to, use that strobe light to like blink and miss the strobe. In those situations, I use a constant light. So it feels like the sun. So it just depends on the client and how they are and how they move and if they're comfortable, if they're nervous, all those things. Sometimes a big set can make people very nervous or self-conscious. That strobe can do that for a lot of people, even big celebrities. So if I feel that from them, then I'll switch to constant lights and talk them through because that big constant light is bright. It's like a deer in headlights. And sometimes they get lost in the light and they can just forget about where they are and open up visually.
And of course, the sort of progress in terms of technology, like camera technology and lighting technology as well, has really enabled photographers now really to do a lot more with constant light than maybe only 10 years ago.
Oh, totally. Like 10 years ago, I wasn't shooting the way I shoot now. Like the cameras have advanced so much. I'm a Nikon man. I love my Nikon Z9, and the focus is so on all. I can now focus on the image because the camera, I know in terms of being sharp at any f-stop. If I want to shoot wide open 1.4, 1.2, I know it's going to be super sharp on those eyes, which opens the door for me to think about the image versus, worrying about, is this sharp or whatever. So yes, changed a lot, changed a whole lot. And I love that about how we can shoot now and get great pictures anywhere. So it just leaves it to you to focus on the image versus, being lost in the tech.
I've really felt that with headshots, for example, being able to rely on eye autofocus, because I'm a Nikon shooter myself, with that advancement in eye autofocus, for example, I really don't need to worry. And what that does is it gets me away from being stuck behind the camera, because that's the thing,
Yes.
As you mentioned, especially with headshot clients, these people are not used to being in front of the camera at all. They're not actors,
No.
They're not celebrities, they're business people, or sometimes they are actors, obviously, but they might be used to being on a film set and saying their lines,
the camera
and
ever.
and being flashed at all the time, with strobes and all the rest of it. And so it is an unusual, unnatural situation. And then, for me as a photographer to hide behind the camera because I have to constantly look through, that itself, I found that was more of a hindrance than anything else. And eye autofocus is probably the single bit of technology that's really enabled me to really to get to the point where I can rely on the camera to actually get a sharp image, and that's
very true. I love that now. You can shoot so differently than you did like 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And that's a wonderful thing. It's opened doors for getting images where you don't have to worry about focus anymore. That's like a game changer in many ways.
Yeah, because that's really something that goes back to the very, very, very beginning of photography. All those like hundreds of years ago. Focus has always been the single most annoying thing that we had to deal with, and now for the first time ever, is really something that we can almost, not necessarily ignore, but it's definitely not as important as it used to be, because the technology does it for us.
And it's kind of funny even thinking about that, because now I'm seeing something really interesting happening where some clients kind of want pictures that aren't so sharp anymore. Had a client say recently, like, oh, can you make it more like out of focus looking? Because some people are really liking the old film look where it's not so sharp, because it feels authentic.
Yeah, that's why I hate new televisions, like television sets. I can't stand them. Like
So sharp.
too sharp. Everything looks like a TV show. Like you watch something
Yes.
like, I don't know, like Star Wars or something, right? And you go, but that doesn't look like it looks
Yeah.
in my head.
I saw a show recently, I felt the same way. Like, it's too sharp. Everything, it felt digital and sharp
Yeah.
and unrealistic.
Yeah. And maybe it's also because, the way we're, used to watching movies, or the way we're used to seeing movies, it's like, I think that movie look is part of transporting us into a different world. Because,
Yes.
watching a movie, that's not what the real world looks like. And that's why I think we love it so much.
It's fantasy.
It's because fantasy, exactly, is different. And I always find, like, when I watch something, we don't, like, my wife and I, we don't really watch TV very much. Like, we watch some movies on Netflix or whatever. We don't have a TV service per se. It's because we rather do other things. But whenever I go to my in-laws and, I watch something on their huge, humongous, like, takes up half the wall type TV set, I always think, like, wow, that's it. There's something grating about this. It just looks too real. It doesn't pull me into it. I think that's the thing.
It does take you away from it. I had that same feeling recently as watching something like, what's wrong with this picture? And it was just so sharp. And I couldn't even focus on the storyline, because I'm looking like at the image. I'm like, wow, what's wrong with this?
Do you get inspired by, for instance, by cinematic lighting sometimes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've always got to study, like, other art forms out there, and not just in movies. I'm always going to an exhibit. Art is everywhere here in Japan, so I'm always going to an exhibit. Sometimes I'm looking at the lighting even in a painting, and seeing how they are creating this feeling in a painting. So I'm looking for inspiration all the time. I live in the land of the rising sun. So early in the morning, the sun's up, and it looks very different. So the light, how it plays at different times of the day, and even also being, around Tokyo at night, where it feels like Blade Runner in many ways sometimes, getting inspired by that feeling, because it's a very different feeling than being in, say, Times Square, New York. It feels like Blade Runner very often. And I'm like, oh, how do I get this feeling in an image? What is it about the difference? So I'm always dissecting it.
When you shoot a celebrity, and let's say they've had a big movie out, like, let's take Blade Runner as an example. Would you take your inspiration from a particular movie in the way that they're lit in there, or would you disregard all of that and basically think of a different way of lighting them?
It depends on, number one, who I was shooting for. But speaking of Blade Runner, I actually did a shoot where I was trying to imitate light from that movie, the last one, because it was so beautifully lit. I'm like, oh, how'd they get this image like this? I want to get that feeling. So yeah, I'll take inspiration from a movie all the time, because if it hits me in a certain way where it stands out, I'm like, oh, that's beautiful. And we're always trying to make pictures that are iconic or that make people pause. We live in a world where everybody's swiping left and right all the time. If you can make them stop for a second, pause for an instant, you've done something right. And that's, I think, my job as a visual creator, is to make them pause just for a moment and take in that image.
Isn't it incredible, though? If we compare the world today, the Instagram, swipe through copious amounts of images,
Yes.
and then as a photographer being forced to kind of create something that makes people stop, like you said, even just for an instant. If you compare that to a time when, images used to live on walls, for example, where you could take the time and you could stand in front of it. And really, whether you wanted to or not, you'd have to take those images in more than today.
Yes.
How do you deal with that change in the way that we perceive imagery around us? As a photographer, how has that changed the way you approach things?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I think about that a lot. As I mentioned before, I'm going to a lot of galleries all the time. And what hits me today more than ever is the power of seeing a real image in person. So now I'm working harder than ever to get my work on gallery walls, have exhibits, and get people to come out and get away from their device and look at beautiful images on a wall, because then you have them. They're away from their devices. It's like an escape. Like we go to a movie theater, you can't look at your phone. It's an escape from reality. And going to a gallery, a museum, an exhibit is the same. You give people a chance to escape, to get away, and they're transfixed for a moment. It's one of the few places where I go where I don't see everybody looking at their device. And that's a great thing for a visual creator, to have your work on a wall where people can see the quality, see the image, and take it in, versus swiping.
Yeah, I went to a place in the UK called Bath a few weeks ago, and it's known for an ancient Roman bath. Basically, that's what the town is. The city is. Yeah. And it's really quite beautiful. It's incredible how well preserved it is. This is one thing, and they've restored bits of it. Wow. It really is phenomenal. And there's sort of a museum that they kind of build around that. And it really takes you through. It's quite extensive, actually. It's pretty phenomenal. I mean, given that all that stuff's like 2,000 years old, it's pretty crazy. But they have this app that you can download, and then there's like almost like a guided tour. Like you listen to it on your phone, or you watch certain images that pop up on your phone. The thing that really struck me was when I was there, I was like, I see all these people. They're in this phenomenal place. They're walking through it. There's so many things to see. Not only the exhibits, but also like the actual infrastructure. I mean, it's pretty crazy. Looking at a pool that's like literally 2,000 years old. That's still functional. There you go. What the heck? And they're just looking at their phones and go, and like swiping from one exhibit to the next. I'm thinking, what's everybody doing? Look up.
Yeah. I live in Japan, where everybody's like, millions of people everywhere all the time, and people looking at their devices, walking, reading manga or anime, and it's kind of like that movie Don't Look Up. Everybody's like looking down, and it's kind of sad in many ways. But hopefully, we won't always be in this place. I'm looking forward to that day when it's going to the next thing, whatever the next thing is.
It's probably mobile devices built into your brain or something, whatever it is. Who knows? I want to take you back to your beginnings in photography. How did you first get into, well, how did you first get into photography? And also, like, what was your path like getting into, shooting fashion and beauty and covers for magazines? What did that look like back then?
Well, the start is my father who got me into photography. He gave me a camera early on and taught me how to print and process my own, images. I think that part of being in the darkroom really got me into photography as a young kid. And even now, even this past weekend, I was looking for a darkroom so I can go and print images because I have this extensive still, film archive and still shoot film from time to time. So to go into a darkroom and print takes me back. So once I got into photography, I went to art school, majored in photography, dropped out of school, moved to New York, and started working as a photo assistant, apprentice first, then photo assistant to fashion and beauty photographers. And that got me going in the field. I did that for, I guess, like 3.5 years, working as a photo assistant, then started showing my work around to different magazines and got my first jobs. And it just kind of like, it wasn't like, back to back to back. It was not easy at all. It was a gradual process. I'd be assisting one day for a job as a photographer, next day shooting a job, and back and forth until I had so much work shooting where I had to stop being a photo assistant. And that's really my path, how I started in photography and got going. Today, people ask that all the time. Like, we got interns here in Japan, and they all want to know, what's the path like now? And I'm like, well, it's a different world now. So instead of shooting like editorial, because it's not as much as it was before, you've got to do everything you can. Show your work, always shoot, always experiment, and really find your voice as a photographer. It's super important, I think, to find what you really enjoy doing versus trying to shoot what you think is going to get work. I see that a lot. I think people are, oh, I need to do this because I want to make money as a photographer. I think that's the wrong approach. I think because you'll burn out and you'll get tired of doing that thing, and the image will feel like, oh, you're just shooting, trying to get a job. If you are shooting what you really enjoy doing, those images feel different and look different. And people, clients, can feel that in the work. So it's super important to do the things that you love doing, regardless if you think it's going to make you money or not. Just do what you love doing the most and see what happens.
That's a great piece of advice, because that's so true. It's also, of course, it's so much easier to do the things that you really love doing.
Yes, it is.
When did you first realize, or how did you first realize that portraiture was your thing?
It's funny. For me, it wasn't so much that I even realized that it was portraiture, beauty, that world. What I loved the most was, it's kind of funny thinking about this now, I love the connection with people. And portraiture, the way I shoot portraiture, gets me up close and intimate with people. And I love that. So as a, beauty, portrait, fashion photographer, and my world really just being here, I'm close all the time. And you create a rapport in that space. I'm like, 4 to 6 feet. That's my world I work in, that space. And being that close, shooting somebody, you create a rapport. It's very intimate. And I love that intimacy that happens in that space. I always have. I think once I just figured that out, that I love these kind of images, it felt right. And I've been in love with that ever since. All my projects, all my personal projects, all my work, shooting for fun, shooting my family, it's all in that space.
I could really feel that. That's exactly what I love about headshots. I love headshots because to me it's sort of as a modern form of portraiture. I just like doing it, and it's that connection, with that person. I always find I find this really interesting because somebody especially with headshots, somebody comes through your door, you've never met that person before, you don't know them, as we say in the UK, you don't know them from Adam, whatever that means, no idea. But you've never met this person before. And then, my job as a photographer, is how I feel about it, is I need to build up a rapport, as you say, and build a connection with that person, as quickly as possible, because time's money, and this session times are limited and all the rest of it. But the way I do it is, I always sit down, have a coffee, get the client involved in a chat. There's really no rush to get them in front of the camera, from my perspective anyway. And what that does is it just takes all the nerves away, but it also builds that connection. And I can ask some probing questions. I can, figure out what they're into, something, as you mentioned earlier, something that's more on a human level, so we can actually have a conversation rather than just giving instructions. Because this is why I hate about these. I've said this a million times. This is why I don't do 20-minute headshot sessions. I just don't do them. It's completely pointless. It's completely and utterly pointless. It might as well. I mean, when people call me about this, I usually send them to the passport photo office, which is like down in town.
I know that time limit thing. Like, who says that everybody's going to be able to give you a great picture in 20 minutes? Most people will not.
Well, because the thing is, like, there is just a commercial consideration. It's just like, okay, 20 minutes, I charge them this much. That's how much money I can make. If I make this much money in 20 minutes, then that's what I make per hour. Blah blah blah. So then it just becomes a job. It becomes a thing that doesn't have any humanity to it at all. And the photo, the portrait, then just becomes a total commodity. And that's not why I'm in the job. That's not what I love about it.
At all. Same here. It's not about the time element for me at all, because I know everybody can't give you an image in a certain amount of time. Sometimes it takes time just to pull it out of each person. And that's whether they're a celebrity or whomever. You've got to sometimes coax it out of them. And you feel when it happens. Sometimes the shoot can be very short and to the point, and you get it, in no time. But very often it takes more time. And as a photographer, you got to feel that.
What do you do if they, like the manager or whoever says, like, right, you've got 20 minutes and that's it?
Oh, trust me, I've been in that situation many, many times, for a lot of celebrities especially. And I have a trick for that. And that's to get that celebrity or personality or VIP or whomever in such a great mood that they want to stay longer. So it's my job to make them feel so comfortable that they're having a great time that they forget about the time element. And very often, I'll usually make it a place where it's so comfortable where they just want to stay. If you can do that, you'll get the shot.
Excellent. Did you ever have did you ever shoot somebody where you just think, well, this is not working, it doesn't click?
Oh yeah,
this is not happening.
Many times. And those are the jobs when, it's never going to be like perfect for every single job. You're going to have jobs where you have to really fight to get the image. I've had my share of those in 37 years of shooting, for sure. And that's more the challenge for me, to try to pull out that image from that person who may not want to give it, or maybe in a bad mood or wherever. So I'm trying to find that image no matter what. And if I have a client like that, where I'm having a hard time pulling an image out of them that I have in my mind, I'll let go of that idea of that image, like that quote unquote portrait image, and get them the entire time I'm shooting them in my place or in their space or wherever we are. I'll shoot constantly. Like if they're having hair and makeup done, if they're on the phone, I'm trying to find that image when they're not thinking about the image. And very often those images are the ones that are super special.
Did you ever have, how can I put this? Like, were you ever in a situation where you just went, no, I'm not, let's forget it. Let's cancel this here. And that's how I'm going for.
Oh, yes. Let me tell you a story. I was shooting a celebrity. This is back in the late 90s. I'm shooting a celebrity, and he didn't want to have his picture done. And he walks in the room with his manager, And his manager stands by the door of the studio holding his like suitcase and wouldn't really even come in the studio. He stood by the door. And the celebrity says, "Oh, I'm shooting film back then." He says, "Oh, I see you're shooting with this camera. Um, I'm also into photography. How many frames do you have on one roll of film?" I'm like, "Well, I'm shooting medium format film today." He says, "Oh, so you have 12 images on that roll." I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Oh, let's try to just get this image done in one roll of film." I'm like, "Oh my God." So the managers by the door, they want to have me shoot one roll of film and walk out the door. So I'd done my research before the shoot, and we're doing the shoot, and he's counting down as I'm taking every frame. I'm getting nothing. I mean, he's like, "Oh, 8, 7." We get down to like 3 frames. I mean, I'm sweating bullets. I'm like, I'm getting nothing from this guy. So I say, "Do me a favor. For these last 3 images, I want you to take your shoes off and pretend you're in an elevator coming down." And he stops and looks at me. He says, "How did you know that I do that?" So this guy was a famous dancer, and he loved the sound of, being in an elevator. And he'd take his shoes off so he could hear his feet on the floor. So I had him take his shoes off, and he went into this other world. He took his shoes off, put them on his hands, and he starts dancing with his shoes. He forgot about counting down. I shot like 10 rolls of film, and I simply saying like, "Oh, guess what? This is the same roll of film. Give me another roll. Same roll of film. Same roll of film." And he stayed, and I got amazing images. And we became not friends, but became close after that shoot, where he actually gave me an interview for my first book. I shot him again, and it was a fantastic situation that started off being a nightmare.
How did shooting on film differ from shooting digitally now? I mean, for instance, I'm thinking, in the world of digital photography, you can shoot 1,000 frames if you want to, and the sky's the limit.
Yes. Yeah. It's different for sure, because you can shoot 1,000 images or whatever. Sometimes people don't kind of like almost like machine gun through a shoot, but then you guys sit there and go through all those images. Or nobody wants to look at 10,000 images. A photographer doesn't. A client definitely does not want to. You can lose a client by sending 10,000 images to a client, or 5,000 images. Nobody's going to look through that many images. So you have to still be selective about how you shoot, whom you shoot, all those different things, how you light. And also for the subject, they're going to get tired. Nobody's going to sit through that many images. And if you lose them on a shoot, they're gone. So I shoot now the same way I shot when I shot film. I'll shoot, give them breaks, talk for a minute, come back, shoot again. I'll keep that break going, because then with the breaks, they stay fresh. If you just like click, 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 especially with strobe, you are going to wear your client out and lose them. And once you lose them, it's really hard getting them back.
What's the process like after the shoot? I mean, you mentioned going through images. Just describe to our listeners and viewers what the process is like after the shoot. So let's say you've finished the shoot, you're now delivering a sort of a set of images to the agent or the client themselves, or who's going through the images afterwards?
It depends on who the client is. Sometimes, it could be sent right away. Like for example, if I'm shooting like, for the IOC, International Olympic Committee, where they want images right away. Sometimes in those situations, I don't have time to go through the images, but that's rare. Normally I do, and I'm making a selection of my best images. I'll put those together, send the client, those best images. If I have the time, I'll put together a storyboard of my super top level images and send, here's, part A, the images we shot, but here's my selects of the very top images. And very often clients want to see that. What do you like? What do you like?
I find that with headshot clients a lot, because so what happens is, rather than me sending off digital galleries or whatever, I like to do the selection process at the end of the session, just so then everybody knows exactly where everybody's at, and also there's no time delay between me being able to then retouch things. Because this is the thing, especially with corporates, you send them a digital gallery and it takes absolutely forever for them to get back to you, and
Exactly.
so these jobs just kind of just carry on for much longer than they need to. And I just want to get this thing out the door so I can move on to the next thing. That's just how my brain works. And very often, when it comes to the selection process, they'll be like, why don't you choose your favorite shots? I'm like, well, that's not why we're here.
But
your
if
face.
you think about it, we are used to looking at images all the time.
Yeah.
They are not.
Exactly.
So they want to see what we like. They want to see our favorite images of them, because we are professionals. We are the ones who are proficient at looking at images, finding out the best images. Every client wants to see what you like. They may not pick it or like it, but they do want to see what you like. I think it's kind of like my job to show, I like these images because these are my top images because.
And of course, often your insecurities come into the whole thing as well. When what I find very useful is when, once we've whittled images down to maybe 3 or 4, and then, we need to make a decision and pick the hero shot out of that smaller selection. That's when I think my expertise comes in usually, and I'll be like, well, okay, seeing that it's whatever the purpose is for these shots, this might be, it might be an actor who needs headshots for auditions. I can usually point them in the right direction. I think it gets easier at that point. What's important for me, of course, a slightly different scenario from shooting celebrities, clearly, but what helps me a lot is to get them through some sort of pre-selection early on in the shoot. So what I would do is I would pull them out, I would get them in front of the screen, let them look at some images, and that teaches me kind of what they like about themselves.
That's true.
And then I can take that into account. And if somebody says, I hate this side or this thing about my left eye or whatever, I can make sure that I shoot them in a way that they will find favorable. Flattering, that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, absolutely.
Because everybody sees a different thing about themselves. Everybody has this, their pet peeves about how they look or whatever. I think it's very important to find that thing out right away. When I'm shooting right away, I'll very often try to shoot everybody's different sides and show them those first images so you can see, their best side or their weak side, whatever, and get feedback from them. Once I find that side that they favor, I'll stay there.
I'm glad you said that, because I do exactly the same thing. So fantastic.
It's super important to do that. To do that.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I do. I basically do, left side, head on, right side.
Same thing here.
And then, you get them in front of the screen and we'll talk through it. And that's actually, that's often very much, that is the point where all of these self-perceptions come out, and you actually get them in a conversation. But it's also, very closely connected to what you mentioned earlier, or what you talked about earlier, which is that making, creating that rapport and, building that connection. And I always find that actually when we're at the point in a conversation where, the client talks openly about the things that they like about their own face in particular, you're already on a much deeper level where people start to open up about themselves.
That's very true.
And that's a really good opportunity to then, really, in a sense, get them hooked and build that connection. And, on it again, it's at a purely human level.
And it makes all the difference. It's them beginning to trust you. And once they trust you with their image, which is a very intimate thing, if you think about it, once they trust you with their image, you have a client. That's how I have all my celebrity clients and have had. I photographed Aretha Franklin the last 13 years of her life, and it's because she had trust in me by pulling out the best of her all the time.
And that's of course another thing. It's building up these long lasting relationships. And I know you've got a book out, Aretha Cool,
Yes.
that we'll talk about. How did that relationship with Aretha Franklin, I mean the Queen of Soul, basically, how did that happen? How did that come together?
It's funny because it really came about from me doing the same thing that I've been talking about, working on finding out who she was from the very beginning. Like the very first shoot I had with her, I doing my research and I found out that she liked yellow roses. So before the shoot, this is before my very first shoot, I sent her a dozen yellow roses and a note saying, "Here's to a great shoot. I can't wait to meet you." So before the shoot, I get a call, not from a manager or an agent, but it's Aretha Franklin herself. And she's asking, "Oh, are you the photographer who sent me yellow roses? No photographer has ever sent me yellow roses." That was the beginning of our relationship before I ever met her in person. So when I got to the shoot, she had the roses, she's talking, we're getting to know each other, and it just built and built and built to the place where uh, she started calling me to find out, "Oh, what's your favorite image that we shot?" Or she'd ask me even beyond photography, "Matthew, what's your favorite title of an album out of these names? What do you like best?"
Oh wow.
Which is crazy to think about that. But that's what happens when a person trusts you with the thing that's most important, their image.
Did you how many times did you have to pinch yourself just to realize that you're actually shooting Aretha Franklin?
All the time. All the time. I remember the first time I got a call from her, it's like the middle of the night. And she was asking me questions that were not photo related. I'm like, oh my God, this is Aretha Franklin calling me to ask about regular stuff. And that's when I'm like, wow, okay, we have a friendship now, a real friendship. Sometimes she'd call and talk about a show she was watching on TV. And we'd laugh and talk about that show. She said, "Have you seen this show?" I love that stuff. That's when you have a connection.
How did the book come together? Tell me a little bit about the
Oh,
book.
it kind of goes back to the very first shoot. So my very first shoot of Aretha Franklin, I've sent the flowers. We finished the shoot. At the end of the photo shoot, I gave her another gift. I gave her a copy of my very first book, which was called Sepia Dreams. And that book was me photographing and interviewing 50 celebrities. She's not in the book. And she goes to the book and she looks at me and she says, "Why am I not in this book?" And, she had a point. She's the Queen of Soul and she was not in the book, but I didn't know her at the time. And I said to Miss Franklin, "I promise you in the future, you will be in one of my future books." And she looks at me, she says, "I better be." That was like the beginning, I guess, of me like having that planted in my mind. So, 14 years later, she passes away and that's on my mind. I'm like, I have all these great images of her. This is before the COVID. I'm like, I should do a book of her. But then COVID happens. I'm starting to pull images together for the book, and the pandemic happens, and I don't have the book done. Hadn't started really putting it together. And through COVID, it hits me. Wow, if I were to die from the pandemic, no one would ever see these images or know these stories. It was just me, in my archive of these images and these stories. So I started working on it toward the end of the pandemic and really hit it hard once it was, kind of safe to start going out there and putting it out there and put this book together that's a celebration of her last decade. Now, there's a lot of things out there about Aretha Franklin. There's 2 movies, there are other books, but all the movies, the other books, those all end before I ever met her. So my photo book is that last decade of her life, last 13 years of her life, and it's showing that, the fun side of her, the images. It's the last official photo shoot of her career in the book, and so much more, and a few stories. It's mostly a photo book, but I have a few stories in the book as well. And there are two editions of the book. There's a normal edition of the book, and then there's 100 limited edition books as well that are out there. And those come with a print, a signed limited edition print, one of 100. Out of those 100 books, I've sold about 48. So there's, a few left of those, but all honoring the Queen of Soul.
What was it like working with Aretha Franklin? How would you categorize it? Was it easy, or did she have very particular ideas as to what she wanted, or did she give you the sort of creative freedom to
particular. Play? She did give me room to play, but she was very particular. I mean, she's the Queen of Soul for a reason. She's very opinionated. And in the very beginning, she'd tell me what she wanted. And then I'd shoot what she want, and then I'd shoot more. And I think after maybe the second or third shoot, she trusted me. And she just kind of let me do what I wanted to do. And I'd give her ideas. She'd tell me ideas before the shoot. We'd talk about them. She'd tell me what she's going to wear. And then I'd give her visuals of what I wanted to do, and we just go to work. And very often, we'd never get through all the ideas. She's like, oh, we've got it. And then that'd be the end of the shoot.
Is there anything you regret not having been able to do with regards to, because I remember Aretha Franklin passed away rather suddenly, as far as I remember.
Yeah, well, not suddenly. She was sick for a while, and even though it was kept quiet, she was sick for a while. The last shoot I did with her, she had been sick, but recovered a little bit. She had cancer. She recovered a little bit. She lost a lot of weight, and she wanted to do a photo shoot, and we did the photo shoot. Then she got sick again for a while, and as she got sick toward the end, we were planning to do another photo shoot. It never happened. She passed away before we did the shoot. I wish I had talked her into letting me come to the studio and just shoot her trying to record. She actually was doing another album. It's going to be her last album. I wish I had talked her into letting me just come and shoot her in studio recording. And I had the idea, but I didn't ask her. I wish I just asked her, can I just come, and do that, just to have it as a backup, but it never happened. I guess I think in hindsight, we always want to do more and more and more for sure. Yeah.
The book's out now. Where is it? Where can people find it?
People can find it two places. In the United States, you can find it on Amazon. It's everywhere on Amazon under Aretha Cool. Name of the book is Aretha and then Cool, Cool. And you could also go on arethacool.com for if you're outside of America, or if you want one of the limited edition books. The limited edition books are only on arethacool.com.
How did you come up with the title, by the way?
Oh, that was easy. The first time I photographed Aretha and got to know her more and more and more, there's one thing she'd always say as I'm shooting her. She'd see a Polaroid back when I was shooting film. She'd see the digital images when I started shooting digital. And if she liked an image, she'd say, oh yeah, that's cool. That's cool. So for me, it was a no-brainer. Aretha Cool, because that was her word, and she was the coolest, singer around. And cool like in that 1970s way, is just like this old school kind of cool, like the epitome of cool.
Yeah, it's funny this, because my kids are like the post-cool generation almost. They don't use that. Like myself, actually probably myself more than my wife even, but like my kids don't really use that word, which is bizarre to me. It's weird.
That's right. It's from another generation. And the way she said it, it was just like, it just resonated in such a different way. But yeah, today people don't really say that. They don't use that word in that way, but she did, and it fit her.
Yeah, it's probably, to my kids, the word cool probably feels like or sounds like when I hear that sort of 50s expression of swell. You know, yeah, that's rather
Oh
swell.
wow. Yeah.
It's totally alien to me. Is there any celebrity that you haven't photographed yet that you would love to get in front of the camera?
Oh yeah. Morgan Freeman is somebody who I'd love to photograph. He's got that great voice. I've never met
Yeah.
him before. Um, there's many people. There's many people. Whew, the list is long, but even beyond celebrities, there are so many people I'd love to photograph. Period. I think people who are changing the world are people who I'd like to photograph. Obama, I'd like to go back in and photograph him. Um, yeah. There's a whole list of people, and they're not just celebrities. Sometimes they're just people who I've met in passing, or I think they have a great face. I just met an exec at Netflix, and we had a meeting. And as we're in the meeting, I'm looking at her. I'm like, she has amazing skin. I would love to photograph her. This just happened last week, and I'm looking at her as we're in the meeting, and I'm looking at her skin and her features. I'm like, she would be great in images. And I'm looking at her stuff online. I'm like, okay, those are cool, but cool. Those are cool images, but nobody's captured what I saw in the meeting. So yeah, I've always had people who I want to photograph. Even in my gym, like I work out like 6 days a week. I'm in the gym every morning, and I'm like, oh wow, I should photograph that person, because they've got a good look, or they have an interesting look, not just beautiful, but interesting. So there's always somebody who I'd like to photograph.
It's funny you mentioned the gym. I went to the gym for the first time in a long time yesterday, and I'm feeling it right now. I'm actually suffering as we speak.
That's a good thing. You're supposed to feel that way.
Yeah, well, I've forgotten what I felt like. And now I'm like, oh my God, everything's hurting right now.
That's a good feeling. That's a very good feeling. So you just got to keep going.
I used to love it. I used to hit the gym at least 4 times, sometimes 5 times a week before the pandemic. And then, when the pandemic happened and all the lockdowns happened and everybody else got into keeping fit because that was the only thing you could do, to me, my gym shut down because they had to, right?
Yeah.
And then I lost all of my mojo. It was like,
Yeah.
and since then, it's like, oh God, I need to, and I keep saying like I need to go back to the gym. But yeah, yesterday my journey started yesterday. That was the thing, and today I'm paying for it.
That's right. We all have day one. I was not going before the pandemic, and then I was hired by the IOC to live in the Olympic Village in Tokyo when they had the Olympics in 2021. And that experience of being in the Olympic Village with the best athletes in the world for a month, living among them, woke me up. And I'm like, okay, to see them perform their event is one thing, but to see them in the village after they perform, they're just getting up like anybody else, having breakfast, working out, or whatever, walking around, talking. When you see them that way, like, oh, wow, this is a lifestyle. It's not, just, yes, they are gifted athletes for sure, but they're waking up and they have this discipline to work out no matter what. Like, I remember, like, the Olympics are over, and my assignment was to be in the village before anybody got there, so I could photograph the village when it's empty, photograph them as they all come in, as they leave, and then when the village is empty again. So I'm seeing it go from empty to being packed to being empty again. And the village is now empty. People are waiting for their flights. And people who have won gold medals, who were there the last day, I get up at like 4 a.m. to photograph, the Olympic rings, hoping that it's nobody there. But people are there all night long, before they leave. And I see this girl who's won gold out training at 4 in the morning. The Olympics are over. She's won gold and she's still out there training. I'm like, wow. That inspired me so much. And then also being around not only the athletes, but being around the coaches and the staff and seeing the lifestyle. I'm like, okay, I need to get in shape. And that really changed my life in a lot of ways. I've been going to the gym ever since, 6 days a week.
Yeah, you would have thought that, the day after the Olympics, that would be the one day where you can allow yourself to just let it slide
Take
just a little
off and
bit.
do nothing. No, I had these images of this athlete and she's out there just running laps and like, wow, it blew me away. Like the games are over. And of course, a lot of people are just taking it easy and doing nothing, but she was out there training still. That just blew me away. I was so inspired seeing her early in the morning. Nobody else is out there. She's out there running. Incredible to see.
And the Tokyo Olympics, I remember they were very, very heavily affected by COVID. They were delayed by a year, I think.
Delayed by a year. They're the only Olympic summer games that happened during a pandemic. And normally the Olympic Village is off limits. There's nobody allowed to be in the village and take pictures. It's a no man's land. It's a free area for the athletes to live and be their own. But for the first time in history, the IOC wanted to have it documented. So I kind of made history in that way by being the first photographer to be able to live in the village, document, life. My credentials were the first ones they've ever made that way to give access where a photographer could be in the village, live there with everybody. And it was just me. I'm the only photographer in the village taking pictures during the pandemic. And it was wonderful, wonderful.
And was that because of the pandemic that they wanted to document that, or was it just sort of
Yes.
a change in attitude?
Well, I think it's a change in attitude for sure, because now they're doing it, but it was the first time they've allowed people to be in there. And they wanted to document it for history's sake, because it was the first one ever. The last time there's a pandemic was over 100 years ago now. And the Olympics, Tokyo, it needed to be documented.
What an opportunity, though. How did you get that assignment?
I have no idea. To be honest, I have no idea. I'm not a sports photographer at all. I wasn't shooting sports. I'm actually doing portraits of people. And they found me and contacted me and said, actually, they wouldn't even let me know what I was doing until the very end, right? It's like 2 days before I entered the village. I didn't know where I was staying. I didn't know I was going to be living in the village until like 2 days before going into the village. The only thing I knew is where I was going to be. I could not leave. They're like, once you go into this place, you can't leave. They never said where I was going to be until 2 days before.
That sounds like a Netflix show. Once you go in there, you cannot leave.
You can't leave. And that was it. Once I got in the village, I could not leave until the games were over.
Phenomenal. What's coming up for you? What's your next thing, your next project?
Oh, wow. There's actually two big projects. One, I'm doing a documentary for the first time. So I'm getting ready to do that. Very excited about that. We're actually in the pre-production phase of my first documentary. And then the other one is an exhibit.
Fantastic. Can you tell us about the exhibit at this point, or is it still under wraps?
Still under wraps. That and the documentary kind of under wraps at the moment. So we'll see what happens with all of that coming together. There's a lot of things in the works. That's on the personal side. On the work side, the same old, same old. I had a great meeting yesterday, as a matter of fact, about doing an assignment in Egypt and in Cameroon. So kind of cool there, because I actually now know people in both places because of the Olympics. So it'd be kind of cool if I get to go to both locations and hopefully connect with people I shot during the Olympics and go from there.
Fantastic. That sounds super interesting. And of course, as far as the documentary and the other projects are concerned. Hopefully we'll have you on the show again in the future talking about those. That would be amazing.
I'd love that.
Matthew, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Camera Shake podcast this week. Thank you so much.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for having me on, man. Thank you so much.
Okay, folks, that is it for today. It was fantastic having Matthew on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll like. Check out episode 224 with Vanelli. I'm sure you love it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should by now because I keep mentioning it all the time. All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, well, just drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring the bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. So thank you for listening and watching. And remember, a new episode drops every Thursday. So make sure you mark that in your calendars, diaries, whatever it is that you use these days. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.